Thank you for joining us for today's Viewcast, Igniting Innovation, How Cloud is Improving the Business of Government, underwritten by GovPlace, EMC, and VMware. We are going to discuss cloud computing trends for the federal government, including examining some current cloud-based applications and the decision-making process for shifting systems to public, private, or hybrid cloud environments. I'm Ryan McCullough, the Vice President and General Manager of the GovPlace Federal Division. With me, I have John Skudlarek, the Deputy Chief Information Officer at the Federal Communications Commission, and Greg Capella, the Acting Executive Director of the Enterprise Systems Development Office in the Office of the Chief Information Officer at the Department of Homeland Security. John, Greg, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Looking forward to a good discussion here. If you would both take a minute, please, and introduce yourselves, a little bit of your background, and what we're going to get things kicked off today. John?
Sure. Good afternoon. I'm John Skudlarek. I'm the Deputy CIO at the Federal Communications Commission, and I've been at the FCC just about 6 months. Prior to serving at the FCC, I was at the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, NTIA. It's the best little agency you've never heard of. And as FCC manages commercial spectrum, NTIA manages all spectrum for the government. So everybody in Greg's organization, in DHS, in DOD, and in all the other federal agencies and local and state who use spectrum get it through NTIA. I'm a retired military officer. I served 21 years in the Army. And prior to coming to the civilian sector, I spent 5 years as a civilian in DOD. And from 2006 to 2008, I was the CIO at the Defense Security Service. If anybody's got a clearance, you may have heard of the JPAS program. JPAS is where all of the DOD clearances are held. And I like to say the thing I'm proudest of is that you never heard of me when I was at DSS because we never got hacked and your deepest, darkest secrets never got out. So that's a little bit on my background. Over to you, Greg.
Okay.
Great, thanks.
Greg Capella, at the Department of Homeland Security for about 6 years now. Worked there in the Enterprise System Development Office. And then prior to that, I did about a dozen years in commercial consulting. And prior to that, I actually retired from the military myself. So somewhat similar background in some ways, and obviously different in others. Okay.
Great, thanks, guys. And I know just from our previous conversations, I'm excited about sharing some of the successes that you guys have had in terms of really driving innovation inside your organizations, leveraging primarily cloud-based technologies and solutions to do that. So to kick that off, innovation's been kind of a buzzword for a few years around government, right? How do we get the federal government to embrace innovation and move that into the environment? As agencies like the FCC and DHS work to increase efficiencies within your environments, what is that path to innovation, maybe with cloud-based or otherwise, that you guys are really embracing to try and drive innovation in your organizations? John, you want to take that first?
Sure. So innovation is absolutely in the lexicon wherever you go right now. Everybody's an innovator. And I will tell you, I have the privilege of working for a boss, David Bray, who recruited me to come to the FCC, who really is a change leader and is a guy who's willing to take risks. And that was one of the things that attracted me to come to work for him. But, you know, I was talking with David before I came over today about, you know, innovation, how we look at it. And, you know, one thing is you can't innovate just for the sake of being innovative. You have to come back to what's the problem that I'm trying to solve. And I think that, you know, for us, it's 102 systems in an organization of 1,750 people. It's running cold fusion. It's running outdated versions of Sybase. It's having some security issues that are harder to work through than they should be because of the software, because of the secure baselines that we're able to run on these systems. And for us, our path forward is absolutely to go to the cloud and to re-architect our information systems so that they can be more flexible and scalable.
Got it. Yeah. Thanks. And Greg?
So our world is changing quickly, right? 10 years ago, we didn't have iPhones. The word cloud came into our lexicon about 5 years ago. And the reason was that the world itself, its expectations are growing, and rightfully so. The public expects that 2 in the morning, they can go check on the status of a passport. Or they can go and get the latest information about Ebola scares in the other parts of the world. The government needs to be responsive to the community, and the president has made that part of his agenda. So part of it is the drive to better facilitate services to the public. The other part is the whole world in which we live is accelerating, in my view. We're getting more and more changes as we go through, and it's impacting the way we do our work. We need to adopt some of those changes ourselves because they offer tremendous savings when it makes sense. Of course, you don't want the president's agenda posted on Twitter. There are things where it doesn't make sense, but where it makes sense and we could save money, we should do it and adopt whatever technologies make the most sense in that context.
Great. And I think as a lead into that, and you're both shared discussions about how I think cloud is applicable to innovation, both mission related in both cases, right? Access to information, speed of delivery of important data to the public,
yes.
Or other things. So, back in 2012, GAO released a report, Progress Made, but future cloud computing efforts should be better planned, was, I think, the statement. The report found that only one of the 20 cloud migration plans submitted by federal agencies to GAO were actually completed at that time. And only 10% of the agencies had migrated a bulk of their IT assets to the cloud. As we're almost to 2015, shockingly, how have your agencies, because you guys have actually achieved levels of success inside of this, right? So I think you've got some really good examples that we could learn from. How have your agencies in particular improved their cloud strategies to help better achieve the cloud first mandate? Greg, I think this kind of start with you.
So DHS has been evolving, right? We were an early adopter and actually somewhat of an innovator in the cloud space. Back before the word cloud was in existence, we developed our first highly virtualized environment, which became part of the cloud. And we have stood up 12 different cloud efforts. We are now looking at, rather than build it ourselves, how do we go into the public cloud where it makes sense? And we're looking at, across the board, how do we use that to better facilitate our mission success and better achieve our results? In terms of the ability to migrate to the cloud, part of the issues we face is that, some of our organizations are as old as this country almost. Some of them came in existence about 10 years ago. We have hundreds of systems. Our IT budget's around $6 billion a year. And if you assume like 80% or so that's on operations and maintenance, that's a lot of infrastructure that would have to migrate. In addition, 5 years ago, the cloud really wasn't all that friendly for governments or other organizations in terms of they were not ready with FedRAMP. They were not ready with certain security requirements, government-only personnel, US-only personnel working on certain aspects of the cloud. Some of the technologies weren't as mature. A lot of the changes happened because of the requirements by not just the government, but by banking industry, for HIPAA, for the healthcare. Those requirements to protect data forced changes in that community. So now, as we get further and further into a more mature cloud, we'll see a greater success in adaptation. Plus, the early lessons learned are being promulgated out. Part of what my office is responsible for is to help the adoption of the cloud, take those lessons learned and bring it across. So one of our biggest components has a program to innovate and change the way it processes paperwork, our U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, CIS. They are going full speed into Amazon Web Services for its latest version of that solution, which is the LS2 program. We're going to take the lessons learned we learned from that and bring it across to some of the other programs, TSA among others. We're also trying to leverage the cloud. So it isn't just that we were slow to move. There were lessons to be learned. The technology wasn't quite so mature. And bluntly, the rules around the cloud, like the requirements for security, weren't quite as well defined. So we're getting better opportunities now, and we're going to be exploiting those more and more as time goes on.
Appreciate that, Greg.
I think Greg raised a really good point. And that is, I believe that when the laws are interpreted and then provided to the executive branch as whatever kind of guidance or policy, often coming from OMB, that there is an expected lag time because the federal government, DHS is a many-splendored thing to begin with, and now you take all of the departments and agencies and even commissions like ours, and you try to turn them to move onto a thing like Cloud First. I fully believe that they understood at the outset that there was going to be a significant learning curve and a significant lag between when it was promulgated and people were legitimately trying to get it done and getting to the point where we actually did have a security framework that was workable, and getting to the point where we actually had cloud options that could be understood by people that weren't PhDs in cloud. And that we actually could start to have pricing models where we could negotiate depending on whether we were talking about the amount of storage we wanted or the number of transactions or the number of hours that we're going to be accessing a certain system. These are all things that we have to calculate that have matured over time and I think provided now the framework for us to be able to move forward. I actually went back and pulled that audit report. And I think the points they made were really valid and track with what you were saying. And it's a matter of a maturation process over time. So, in our case, we've already got applications that are running in the cloud today. And we have a plan to move forward where we will ultimately put everything into the cloud except the most basic of on-prem computing capability.
Mm-hmm. And if I can just tag on, some of the things we're seeing is that the communities that support us, they're essential for our lifeblood, if you will, contracting, security, they had to evolve too. Mm. Contracting doesn't want to release a contract for $25 a monthly charge on a VM. Right. It makes no sense. So how do we get a good contract vehicle in place to use an Amazon Web Service with 1,000+ CLINs, or to basically not have a defined quantity up front, which is hard to get around in the FAR. So the rules, the paradigms had to be adjusted, some of the rules had to be looked at hard, and some new policies and procedures have been developing. So it's been maturing.
And we're still working through that.
Very
Absolutely.
So that's a great point. We often hear that it's very rare that when you're trying to enable innovation or a change in policy, procedure, execution, it's very rarely the technology that is the thing that holds us back, right?
Yes.
You've talked about...
What a great lead in.
Yeah, right. Well, you've talked about the fact that even procurement strategies are something that can impact that, right? Mm-hmm. Policies associated with limits on the spending and how we manage that is something that's a big impact to that. And the other piece of that, which everybody says, right, is the cultural aspect. You talked about the fact they make this mandate. There are policy and procedure pieces that need to be addressed, and then there's also the cultural aspect of how we're going to actually manage these things. And we hear all the time, it's not technology, it's the culture. Well, yes. The truth is, you guys have actually achieved success inside the cloud today. So you've now actually solved the culture problem to some degree within your relative organizations. If you could take some time to share with our viewers how you've approached doing that, what drove the success in getting over the cultural hurdles, and then how you've taken that to build a model that's hopefully something that can be replicated by the audience. Greg, if you want to start that?
Certainly. So we have, as I mentioned earlier, a dozen different cloud efforts, and we're going into things like Amazon Web Services, we're going into Salesforce, we're going to Google, among others. Part of what we're experiencing is that the older applications that we're trying to migrate in had an installed base. We may have had dozens or maybe as much as 100 folks who kept that care and feeding going, that were using that on a day-to-day basis, that knew, when I hit, Alt-4, that, I got my payment screen or whatever it may be. So when you change, the way they've been doing business for a long time, that is a tough thing for people to adjust to. And, some of those newer solutions may not have the same features and functions because my prior solutions may have been evolving over a span of 10 years. So it's been tuned up for what I needed to do in that particular role. Go to a new solution, it may save a fortune over the prior solution. It may be much more secure because now you were able to catch some of the patches you couldn't because you'd gotten down a cul-de-sac by developing a one-off solution that you couldn't upgrade. So there's a lot of positives, but the impact on the people that have to work on it, that have to actually maintain it, sometimes it's a substantial thing. So you have to make sure there's training, you have to make sure there's incentives, and bluntly you need sponsorship from senior management. And I can't emphasize the last point enough. Senior managers, their viewpoint toward a change make a huge difference in the acceptance. If they're willing to work with the teams and work through the issues, there's always an issue. There is no perfect solution, besides the ones I built, but there are no perfect solutions. So management has to be willing to adapt. And if we need to make a little tweak here and there or put in a little extra money to fix something, they have to be willing to step up to it.
Yeah, and Your example, Greg, is something that I think is going to be consistent with a number of other large departments out there, right? They're going to have a series of agencies working on specific missions of their own that need to get behind a departmental endeavor or initiative that's going to be consistent. And so can you speak briefly to how your office is going and engaging those agencies to get them bought into the vision and then achieving the buy-in at a cultural buy-in to the departmental?
Certainly.
Strategy.
So there's a number of factors here. First is DHS is a new organization. Last decade or so we were together. 22 organizations coming together. It's been characterized in the media as the largest integration effort since the forming of the DoD. I would probably throw the forming of the intel community, but same idea. You basically have a catharsis going on. And cultures from each of those organizations. You've got organizations like Coast Guard that have been around for hundreds of years. You've got organizations like TSA that stood up approximately 10 years ago. So in its current manifestation. So when you bring those together and you try to share paradigms, well, you've got somebody who has systems that may be 20, 30 years old in some case, another one that got brand new money 10 years ago to build from scratch. There's going to be a completely different viewpoint on how to do the next set of changes. I may be coming from a relatively good position because I don't have those legacy apps that I'm stuck supporting. And that's not taking my operations and maintenance monies to support those as much. So there's a lot of cultural issues there that have to be addressed. But ultimately what it comes down to is you need senior management buy-in to help push those changes. You have to have a relatively good plan on how you're going to get to that final point with training, with the impact on the users well understood, and you have to get buy-in from the constituents. As much as you can try to do force top-down, it's a hard thing to do. Even organizations like the military where we have a common history. Top-down works for the military because basically they'll salute, but if you don't have that type of organization, it's harder to get change. And what's even harder is to get buy-in and effective growth through that change. Adopt and grow to make it better.
Right. Yep. Right. Thanks. John, how about from your perspective within the FCC, what was the approach that helped you get through the cultural hurdles? What drove that?
Well, I will say we're still working on it.
Okay.
So I don't want to say that we've already planted the flag and declared victory on all fronts, but I will say that, again, there are very definite parallels. What I really love about the FCC is that we are, if you will, self-contained. So, my boss, the CIO, reports to the managing director, who reports to the chairman.
Right.
And I mean, I actually get to talk to the chairman, which is kind of cool. So we do have leadership buy-in. We do have a chairman who actually launched a process reform initiative across the commission, and IT is a critical component of that. So already we've got top cover at the most senior level. Excuse me. The other thing is we've got a managing director who is a visionary individual, and David Bray, our CIO, my boss, is great, and I think he sees the big picture. So he has put together a really great leadership team to try to manage all aspects of the enterprise and the enterprise transformation. And he does a lot of the kind of higher order thinking and politics, and I mean politics with a little p, to try to ensure that the conditions for success are there in terms of winning people's hearts and minds. Beyond that, internal to the organization, we do, if you could look this up, the FCC in the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey comes out either at the top or near the top consistently as one of the best places to work in government. Nice. Now that's really great, right? It's really great to work in an organization that everybody loves and wants to be a part of. However, if you're talking about IT people who have been there for 20 years, who actually set those servers up, back to what you were saying, Greg, and who love their system and love their servers and hug them desperately, and maybe it was good enough then and they think it's still good enough now, having to try to affect change with them is a leadership challenge.
Got it.
And we've done that a couple of ways. We've brought in some new folks. That's one way that we've done it. So we've broadened the team. And, I think hopefully like any successful large change effort, we've tried to pick a couple of things to start small with and achieve success to get some traction. Right. We have just stood up a cloud-based complaint management system. If anybody goes to fcc.gov/complaints, you can see the new cloud-based system that we just put in to manage complaints. That's one of the things the FCC does. We receive and process complaints that people have for junk faxes or slamming or indecency or turning up the volume on commercials. I mean, you maybe didn't even know you could do that. But anyway, so we've had some successes. We've shown that we can do it, and we're getting people on board. And we brought in some new people with new ideas, and we're trying to, intermingle them with what I like to call the old guard, so that we've got a team that is building and growing as we move forward and embracing change.
Got it. Great. That's some great background. I appreciate that, John. I think that one of the other things I'd like to ask both of you guys is, what is it that, so you've got great examples of really public cloud engagement and I think DHS hybrid cloud engagement. And Greg, you spoke a little bit to how that's been evolutionary inside DHS, right? The move to cloud started pre the word cloud. And I think I'd be interested in a little bit of what drove the decision process for you guys and the workloads you put in the public cloud, for example, John, and Greg, how you guys have evaluated those different things that you've put in either private or public clouds, and what you see as being the next steps, right? What are the drivers behind those decisions? John, if you want to take that one first.
Well, sure. So first of all, we do not have any classified information, and we don't currently have any FISMA high systems. So for us, when we looked at our options, whether we'd look at public or hybrid or private cloud, for us the logical choice seemed to be public cloud, because we believe that we can achieve the security that we need, and of course the FedRAMP maturity process ongoing, and additional cloud providers getting FedRAMP certified has been a huge step forward there. So we think that we can get the security that we need in the public cloud, and it gives us greater flexibility to have more options, if you will, in terms of scalability, speed, or potentially pricing models. Right. So in terms of going to the cloud, I think we kind of have two aspects on that. One is I think it's inevitable. I think that's where we're going. There may be some nuclear command and control systems, or there may be other very sensitive systems that are going to remain in a private cloud or just in the host organization's domain. But I think for the majority of the computing that's being done right now by the federal government, and probably more broadly by other commercial entities, that's where you're going to continue to see increased economies of scale, increased flexibility. The advantages, I think, will overall far outweigh the disadvantages, and I don't necessarily even mean that from a price point perspective. So for us, the other thing is we do have performance metrics on systems, so that we know for our optimization model for our auctions, when we auction spectrum, we actually run optimization models to figure out what is the best way to parse up and potentially, we like to say we defrag the spectrum and then repack it for the purpose of being able to auction. So how do you do that? And we're talking about, potentially billions of transactions. So from a transactional standpoint, we have some sensing of what our throughput requirements are, what our computing requirements are, and they do ebb and flow. They do scale. Sometimes you need a lot, and sometimes you don't need much at all. Sure. Conversely, I mentioned earlier when we were having a little chat that we take comments from the public. Anybody out there that's familiar with the open internet debate, and if you're watching this, I'm shocked if you don't. Otherwise known as net neutrality. We're a rulemaking organization, the FCC. We make rules, and part of the rulemaking process, the federal rulemaking process that I didn't know anything about 7 months ago, is that we have to put out public notices and give the public the opportunity to comment on them before the commissioners and the chairman actually vote to make a rule. And when it came time to get input on open internet, we got over 4 million comments. And when you've got John Oliver on late night TV, inciting people to make sure the FCC knows how you feel, it has and the commercial providers as well. The commercial internet providers were absolutely telling their customers to let the FCC know how they felt. And I'm not taking a stand one way or the other on what we should do about net neutrality. I'm just telling you, when you have a system that was designed when people were, running like 14.4 modems, and you're now getting 4 million comments, it gives you the opportunity to reflect on how might you better be able to architect this. And we believe that moving to the cloud is going to be a tremendous advantage down the road, both in terms of flexibility and scale.
Yeah, that's great. And so it's mission driven both for providing access to the information, the data, the things that you've got, and also mission driven in terms of being able to take the impact of the response from the public to address some of the things you're doing. So that scalability is a big driver for you guys.
Absolutely.
Appreciate that.
Okay.
Greg?
So when we use the word cloud, we're actually talking about a spectrum of options. There's everything from basically what you think of as virtual hardware, all the way through to complete systems end to end. And so a part of what we're looking at is, where does it make sense to migrate in? So if you're on a mainframe, it may not be possible to move to most clouds. It's just not offered as a cloud service in a classic sense. On the other hand, if we're looking at Exchange, most of us run Exchange for email. There may be offerings out there that offer pretty much a form, fit, and function offering that provides that whole capability. So part of it is there a match out there in the environment? And what we're finding is that even though there may not be a match, what we're looking at is we're at a point now where we have to upgrade no matter what on some of these systems. So we're looking at what I call the Eastern European telephone situation, going from no phone to a cell phone, basically in that quantum leap. So can we go from a system that's basically end of life to the newest technologies and basically innovate into that new platform? So that's some of the things we're assessing too. But the easy wins were the ones that were on the traditional platforms, the Windows and Linux-based systems that could migrate relatively cleanly and easily. You get your quick wins, you got your lessons learned, and then you bring it into more difficult situations. Notable exception, of course, Mark Schwartz driving USCIS toward that innovative leap in his organization for processing applications for citizenship and such, where he basically took that quantum leap, said, I'm going to do a whole series of upgrades simultaneously. And he's been incredibly successful.
Great, I appreciate that. And on that note, so Greg, you've spoken to what drove some of the early embrace of virtual technology and some of the more traditional, I guess what we refer to now as private cloud implementations, right? And now DHS is really starting to look at embracing the public cloud where it makes sense, right? The question we've got here from @ChadKirk in DC for you, Greg, is how will cloud be leveraged specifically for emergency preparedness and response? And John, you may want to chime in on that too.
Certainly. So we already are looking at that. So there's many aspects to that. Of course, there's the classic FEMA. So if we have a hurricane, how do we surge in an extra 20, 30,000 people and use that? FEMA's looking at leveraging the cloud, and they already have a footprint in AWS, for instance, for quick expansion and growing. We're also looking at other solutions for expanding our email, for instance, so that we can in turn bring in on these people that relatively quickly respond to the next hurricane or earthquake or wherever it may be and be responsive. The other thing we're looking at is disaster recovery. If there's a hurricane, let's say it takes out a data center and we have one down in Mississippi, if it were to suddenly hit there, how would we make sure that we still have continuity of operations? You just can't stop. Secure flight, for instance, needs to continue. That is, who can fly and who can't on an airplane, and they can't launch without having that feedback. So we have to make sure we have a disaster recovery, a DR site. And so we're looking at the cloud for that. So the program that one of TSA's program, for instance, is looking at putting their DR in the Amazon cloud. So that's just examples where we are definitely trying to harness the cloud for disaster as well as emergencies like FEMA.
That's great. Appreciate that. John, did you want to chime in on that?
Sure. So two things. I think you briefly alluded earlier to the mobile revolution, which is very closely tied to cloud. So I think there's an aspect there that I'll come back to, and the other one is, at least for us, that we've fielded VDI. So that I was going to say I telework, but I really just work extra at home. But I use my VDI, and I love it because it gives me the look and feel of what I've got at the office. So now if I'm in, let's just say Office 365, again, our needs are a little different than your needs. I don't have a crisis management, disaster management organization like FEMA. But nonetheless, if we were in a situation where the work of the commission needed to continue and our actual headquarters here in Washington, for whatever reason, was unusual, I don't know, maybe there was a water main break or something, that we have the ability for people to be able to work remotely and be virtually connected to the environment. Likewise, if we're putting our systems, our auction systems, our complaint systems, our comment systems into the cloud, ideally, you're going to write your SLAs to have a certain amount of redundancy and scalability and failover, so that again, it's less a matter of the security or the operational status of the physical headquarters, and more about the ability of people with connectivity to be able to do their business. And then take that a step further and say that we all had to turn them off and put them over there, but I'm here with my mobile device and my iPad, and I think you guys are too. And I mean, that's again another thing where if my systems are portable and in the cloud and remotely accessible with mobile apps, it just allows us to have another level of security and capability that was not nearly as prevalent, even just 5 years ago, right? I mean, we were happy just to have our BlackBerries. Right?
We were rocking with a BlackBerry. To that point about VDI, right now when there's a snow day in the DC area, the headquarters doesn't get a day off. What we do is we're supposed to remote log in.
Wow.
We use VDI.
That's not going to put you near the top of the best places to work list, is it?
We won't talk about that survey.
All right. No, but I'll tell you, in this market, everybody's got to find a way to work, regardless of what we're facing. And I think that gets right to Ed Shagkirk's question, right? Ed Shagkirk, DC. I think, Greg, I appreciate the way you touched on the responsive aspect of where cloud's going to play. And John, I think you very clearly articulated how the preparedness function is supported by the mobility and the access to data and all the things that have to happen in that regard. So as we're looking at all of the things that go into your decision process as you're looking at the cloud, right? One of the things we haven't talked about yet is, what is the process you go through to look at the workloads that you would consider moving to the cloud? How do you assess the cloudability of the different things that you've got going on inside your world, right? How do you determine where these workloads should reside, if in fact they should be in the cloud at all? So if you guys could take a moment, just kind of walk us through the process. What would be some of the approaches you take, the tools you use? How do you go through and do that?
Sure. So we're going through that process now. We're actually in multiple ways. So going back to the fact that it isn't just bare metal, there's also full apps. We've assessed all the apps that we had that were FSMA moderate, to the point basically the clouds are pretty much pre-certified if they're FedRAMPed at the moderate level. Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And we looked at what apps were available. So out of the hundreds, we got down to about 100 some odd that in theory could migrate in with relatively low pain. They were FSMA moderate. They were basically a common platform, Windows-based or Linux-based. And we're talking to the owners to do tests to bring them out into the cloud. There are other factors too, obviously business impact, the requirement for DR, other things. And we also are simultaneously, like I mentioned earlier, looking at platforms. Right now we're assessing email as a platform. Does it make sense, doesn't make sense to go in the cloud? We're looking at other platforms. So we're looking at where it makes sense, and it meets our mission needs, and as an economic potential, let's assess.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Well, so ultimately, we've decided we're putting everything in the cloud. So in terms of how we're making that journey, there's a variety of components. So there were systems that were under development. I mentioned our auction optimization module. We've actually built that, and that runs in the cloud. We also are looking at going to a cloud-based email system. And I mentioned that we've just stood up our complaint system on a platform. I tend not to like to talk vendor names just so as not to be overly partial to anybody, but what we're looking at more broadly for our enterprise now is that we have certain legacy systems that we are continuing to do work on. Okay. And the question then becomes, at what point do we stop doing work on the legacy systems and do we jump to the next evolution? So we're looking right now at standing up a data platform, a web-based data platform, separating out the data from the applications where they're currently intertwined so that we can have all of our enterprise data covering everything we do in terms of licensing, complaints, auctions, comments, everything, because you never know what inferences you can draw from certain data sets when it's all actually together in one place and not in multiple cylinders of excellence, right? So then what we're going to do is we're actually doing a bake-off among certain platforms, things like Salesforce or Pega or Appian, to say what do we think provides us the best platform to then develop against to put together a service catalog to respond to our known and projected user needs in the future. So it's a question of short term, I've got about 207 technologies that neck down to about 102 systems that are in 17 investments. And we're looking at where do we continue, where do we stop, where do we jump? And then in terms of which cloud provider do we use, then it's a matter of some of the things that we talked about previously. It's what are you going to charge me for storage? What are you going to charge me per transaction? What are you going to charge me for time spent on the app? And other variations thereof. If I want to have additional scalability, what order of magnitude will you give me with at a certain price point before I've got to scale up again just in terms of what's available? I mean, there's all kind of permutations here. Right. And I know that people that can now help the government to figure those kinds of things out can provide a valuable service.
For sure. For sure. Okay, so let's see. Basically, with you mentioned, or Greg, you had talked before about some of the migrations you made, and I think one of the things we had talked about prior to getting this started was the concept of, there's kind of two major drivers for people moving to the cloud. It's not just because it's fun and exciting. It's because you're either driving some kind of mission performance improvement or you're driving some kind of a cost savings that's just flat out necessary this day and age, right?
Or both.
Or both, and hopefully in many cases both, right? You shared with me a concept that you refer to as kind of the 80% solution, right? And if you could speak to what you mean by that, what is it about the engagement of the cloud environment that makes that a benefit, and why is that a positive thing? You've got a department with multiple agencies with fairly varying missions in terms of what they're setting out to do. In some cases, you've got agencies themselves with not divergent, but separated missions inside their function. So what is it about that allows those agencies with all those different things to get the benefits of what the cloud has to offer?
Absolutely. So when I refer to the 80%, what I'm referring to is actually not compromising. What we used to do, say 30 years ago in the government, was we put out a specification and they would adapt their software to our requirements. Sometimes that meant completely rebuilding or building from scratch some of the software. That meant when they were done with that product, it was a one-off, and bluntly to move up from that platform to the next iteration to get a patch for a security problem, or even just to keep current, meant that you had to have that vendor come in, modify that solution so it could take that next leap. Very expensive. And it continued to be a huge expense to continue to upgrade.
Been there, done that.
We all have, right? What I'm saying with the 80% is taking some of those requirements that are nice to have, or perhaps, yes, they do add value, but you know what? If you cut down to the core system, don't modify the operating system, don't modify the software so that it looks and feels similar to what you want, but doesn't get you everything. You could probably save a very substantial portion of your cost, enable your upgrades, and basically enable more mission over time. Now, clearly, we all want, all the bells and whistles. But if you basically make your software so unique that you're a one-off, you ultimately hurt yourself. Unless there's an urgent business requirement that can't be met elsewhere, we suggest you try to keep onto that, what we call commodity IT, commodity platform, that same similar item, so that I can go to Amazon, or I can go to Google, or I can go to Rackspace, and I can get competition. When I'm off on one, I pay that one vendor, and I'm stuck with that one vendor. And they get a good profit from that, right, sometimes. So if we get competition, if we go and have commodity IT, we feel we will ultimately benefit the government and, of course, our consumers as we lower the average cost and get more mission capability out there sooner, because we're not customizing. We're not stuck in these cul-de-sacs that optimized maybe 5 years ago, but now are a hindrance.
Well, you really touched on what I think refers back to something we discussed earlier around that cultural aspect,
yes.
right? You look immediately post 9/11 about what the drivers were for the development of the department itself, right? It was anything we can do to have a more secure, homeland. And what you're referring to there is really a change in the dynamics of thinking, and stop
yes.
figuring out the ways to talk about why and how you're different. Figure out ways that you can find commonality around,
That's right.
the things.
Common building blocks. Mm-hmm.
Right.
We like to think of it as the ABC model. Adapt, buy, and then create.
Got it.
Mm-hmm.
And in that order.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so maybe Greg, if you could expand on that a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Where have you seen, or how do you go through that process of making sure people understand the foundational pieces of what is common, maybe, across
mm-hmm.
their environment? How do you get them to buy into, look, the specialized things that you feel you need? How does that process happen where you say, look, you may believe you need these things. Here, how do you get them to buy into, I can get my job done without being so different than everybody else?
Well, it goes back to a number of different factors. Fortunately, the urgency of the various demands on the various program managers help drive innovation and change. One of the urgent issues we face now is a funding problem. Mm. We can't afford to build a lot of custom solutions unless it's an absolute mission requirement. Mm. No one will second guess, if we had to have something. But why would I customize Exchange? We could buy it, or Google. Why would I customize a mid-tier? Why can't I just go to Apache or whatever solution? So if you look at that and then say, all right, if I need to achieve X result, and I use these parts to build to that result, how much more do I add on top? Mm-hmm. Not do I make a new tier, but do I use the common building blocks, stay with a common infrastructure, and then add on what I have to at the top, rather than adapt each piece or build my own.
Got it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I guess, John, maybe another question for you. So the FCC is down a path. Clearly, you've defined all of your things are going to the cloud, to use your word from before, to the public cloud, mind you, right? Everything's going to public cloud. What is it? We've got a number of members in the audience, both from government and from industry, that are looking for, one, to build upon the successes that the FCC has driven, right? And to be able to take that model and help others to succeed with it. What are some of the things that you would like to ask for from industry? Are there things that industry can do to assist the FCC in this mission of driving toward the cloud, driving toward public cloud? You've got your methodologies, you've got your platforms, you've got your workloads identified. What are the things that industry could do to assist you in that process?
Well, I actually was meeting with folks from IBM recently, and I told them the more simple and understandable you can make your offering, the easier it is for us to understand what it is that you're selling us and what the terms and conditions are that underlie that offering, the easier it's going to be for us to figure out how we're going to move forward and do so in a manner that we're comfortable with, that we can sell to our stakeholders, that our procurement folks are comfortable with. Because, we talked about parameters, and I gave you a bunch of them, and those are all things that we consider. But I'm not going to tell you that it's a crystal clear path or that everything is readily understandable. Okay. I mean, we absolutely believe in free enterprise, and we know that our customer partners are in business to make money, and that they've got people that they have to answer to, and we absolutely respect that. But I think that our customer partners, our vendor partners, our support contractors also have to understand that in a more restricted financial environment, that we've got to make every dollar count, and that we've got to be successful more often, because we used to be able to afford some failures, even some rather significant ones, and I don't think that we have that same flexibility anymore. The expectations are higher, the money is lower, and the scrutiny is much greater than it ever has been, in my opinion. So it's kind of the the triple whammy there, and being invested in making money is a wonderful thing, but being invested in your customers' success is a thing that would help everybody in the long run.
Got it. Appreciate that. So Greg, one thing I think that I'm interested in getting, for same question to you, right? And DHS has essentially outlined a conceptual vision of where they want to go in terms of the new enterprise computing model that you're looking for inside a cloud. Could you maybe take a few minutes to kind of describe that, the logic behind the structure of that, and what industry could do to really achieve success in the different levels that you've outlined there?
Sure. Our new concept for how we want to go forward is basically to stop owning as much as we can. We want to get as a service from communities, the commercial community, all we can. So rather than us buy a piece of hardware, have it sit into our data center that we manage with our guards, with our power, we want to basically get those compute cycles from whomever. So the enterprise compute strategy is really around getting the service from the vendor in the most economical way and forcing them to compete. To make that happen, we're teaming with our partners in procurement and legal and finance on creating what we call a broker structure. The broker itself would own the relationship with the vendors, whether it's Amazon, Rackspace, or whomever. And they would come back with the parameters on how well they're performing. So they would actually tell us, all right, this vendor provides a Windows 2008 R2 virtual machine, and this one here is 10% cheaper, but they had 20 times the outage rate over the last decade or whatever, last year. So we would get those parameters and make an educated assessment based on our business needs on what makes the most sense. And we would have a relationship with the broker, who in turn has it with that vendor. The vendor doesn't perform, we're going to use competition to basically enforce behavior. We will move our load, because we are in commodity hardware. We're not going to customize, we're going to make it so we can move. We'll move that load to whoever can provide that service in an effective manner. You're not making me happy, you're not giving me good performance, fantastic, I'm not going to buy from this vendor, I'm going to buy from this vendor. And ultimately we're going to allow the marketplace and controls rather than us. Right today, if a vendor is not performing, I bring in my procurement office, I bring in my legal office, they bring in their lawyers, and it can get to be a tete-a-tete, a very long and drawn-out process. Here we have immediate financial impacts, immediate financial control over what is happening in that environment. So we can basically get that quick feedback loop.
So it's really going to be a mechanism to improve the business operations on an as-needed basis.
Correct.
Not just access the workloads, but really improve performance within
Exactly. Leveraging the marketplace, leveraging competition, forcing them to meet our requirements, and if they don't, they have immediate financial impact.
Got it. So we've got a few minutes left. I want to make sure that those in the audience are aware. You please do ask questions. We want to make sure that we're addressing that for you while we go through this conversation. And on that note, while we wait for some folks to chime in with that, I wanted to ask both of you. So let's have a quick kind of a visionary part of this conversation, all right? Greg, you made an interesting comment before when you said that when you started the process, the word cloud didn't exist, and we've referenced it a couple times. If you were to look out from a visionary perspective and say, what is cloud computing going to look like, or what's it going to be doing, or how's it going to be engaged by the federal government, call it 5 years from now, maybe 10 years from now if we could actually look that far. I'd be interested in both of your comments on what you think is what the world's going to look like in that day in terms with respect to cloud involvement in the federal government.
Certainly. Just to reference back, the iPhone came about 7 years ago.
Right.
So predicting 5 years in the future is going to be an interesting opportunity here. But I would say that we, the government, right now, DHS leases thousands of dedicated lines. I would say that except for certain mission requirements or as backup, we'll get away from dedicated lines. We'll be using mostly the net itself, much like the public does. You get your Netflix very reliably today, very inexpensively to your home. We expect to leverage many of those same sources for anything that other than absolutely mission critical. And even if it's mission critical, we may just have a backup line to make sure we have it there. I would expect us to have a vast majority of our compute cycles in the cloud. Certainly for DR, or disaster recovery, and continuity of operations. But for anything less than the most essential applications, I would say within 5 years, you either have them in the cloud or moving into the cloud. I would think the cloud itself is going to be much more sophisticated. Right now, it's relatively difficult to work with the cloud. Some vendors will not directly contract with the government. There's one exception for this one vendor, but otherwise, we go through a broker who basically provides us their services because they don't want to sign down for the government requirements. I would think competition over time is going to reduce that ability to push off the government requirements. And I think industry is going to go the same path. I mean, it's not like we're going to be alone. The same security requirements that DHS has, banking has, HIPAA has, Sony has today. So that is, so the same requirements are going to drive industry. And I think what we're going to see is where we have FISMA mod, I think industry is going to want the same things. They're going to want to see that, and that's going to drive down costs, and it's going to create a consensus around when I sign the bottom line, here are some of the features I get for free, rather than we, the government, are special with our own little groups.
Got it. And John, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And John?
Well, I basically predict the death of the PC.
Okay.
PCs, as we know them now, are going away. I think there will be more tablets and mobile devices, and I think more people are going to be operating in an untethered fashion. And I think the cloud is going to provide the computing infrastructure that people are going to leverage, pretty much anytime, anywhere, any way they want to. And I'm kind of a dinosaur, but we know that the young people that are coming in behind us, my kids being included, have very different expectations about what their experience is going to be and what's going to be available. So, the other thing is, I don't know if your environment, if people can check their personal email or not.
No.
I think that we're going to have to continue to balance the requirements of mobility and capability and social in all of its many aspects with security and find ways to allow people to be able to do those things. Because the demand is going to be there, and I've said it other times. It used to be that the government drove the marketplace, and now there's no doubt that the marketplace is driving the government. I still remember the first time I saw my first instance of Microsoft Word. I was like, "What is this?" I never knew I needed a word processor till I saw one. And who could live without it? I mean, I would be interested to know what percentage of federal workers do not, have some sort of computing device that they work with or through for any purpose.
Yeah, I would imagine that's a pretty low percentage.
Yeah.
Okay.
So as the marketplace evolves, the workforce is also maturing and changing, and we're going to have to evolve the services and support that we provide.
Very much so. And I think wearable technology, whether it's in, advanced phones or other devices, become more commonplace. So we have to find a way. I think security is going to be starting to be more effectively embedded in some of these devices. Right now, there's a TPM module going to certain vendors' phones, which is basically a place where you can hold encrypted data and keys so that you can basically ensure you have a trusted session. And it's going to be where that's commonplace because, much like you saw with some of the celebrities being hacked into, that desire to have security in your personal life is going to become more and more important as the public becomes more aware of how really exposed we are as a very open society. And there's going to be a need for more protections.
Yeah, you suspect in order for the big transition to really occur, the security in the cloud will in some ways have to exceed what exists kind of anywhere else, right?
That's right. Well, in the cloud, devices, it's going to be multi-layered.
Right.
So it's going to be a tiered approach.
Right.
you mentioned Sony briefly.
Yeah.
I mean, if anybody knows what's going on with Sony, we're talking Sony, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
I mean, you would think they had a fairly significant budget to be able to protect themselves, and obviously it didn't work so well. So I think that's probably, you have a data breach, even Home Depot, they recover. Target, they kind of dip, they come back. I mean, there are instances of smaller companies that had a breach that actually killed them. But I think the general public has been sort of almost desensitized. And now when you look at like Sony Pictures, Sony Entertainment imploding technologically, I think that's got a lot of people's attention that, it really is a very dangerous world out there and could have very direct financial and business impacts. And I think the general public, a couple of stars get hacked. I haven't seen the pictures myself, but again, that gets some people kind of excited. But when you realize that it can happen to anybody on a much broader scale, maybe all of our banking information goes away. Now that becomes a much more interesting problem and one that gets people's attention much more seriously.
For sure, yeah. Definitely something where you've moved from just accessing the data as a problem to being truly malicious with the intent is a big driver. Okay, so gentlemen, I want to say thanks for joining us today. I think one other thing I'd ask you for as we try to wrap up here, we have an audience of quite a number of people. I'd like you to have an opportunity to, as you've kind of embraced this change and really tried to drive innovation within your organizations. There are things that I think you can recommend, things that we could get other people to embrace as part of this process, right? What would be a call to action you might have for the industry or for your government counterparts that you'd like them to really do moving forward? And John, if you want to start with that one.
Sure. I would say that you have to realize that the cost of doing nothing is ultimately a lot greater than taking risks and changing. And I think, again, that this is going to be something that is more and more relevant to everybody, whether they would just wish it would all go away or not. So I think, my call would be take a look at what's out there and be prepared to make some hard decisions now. And we are doing that, trust me. I mean, we are talking to our stakeholders and saying we're not going to be able to do that now because we're investing for the future, and we're trying to move away from the 80-20 rule, right? So I think that you have to look at what's out there and start planning and figuring out how to marshal your resources and your political capital to be able to put yourself on a path to change.
Okay.
I would say that first is that look hard at where you can't use commodity IT. The commodity items are the ones that come off the shelf. If you can't use it, question why. Because as soon as you get off that path, you're now into a customized world, and you're going to pay more in the long run, and it's going to suffer, and you will not be able to move easily to the cloud. Or if you do, it's going to be a one-off, which is no better than a one-off in your firewalls. So focus in on staying within the boundaries of the commodity hardware, commodity software. Try hard to get an initial project in place where you can actually show your user base the impact of doing it and getting some lessons learned and grow from there. So just don't do a giant leap in. Do a project, learn, grow, and reach out to those of us who have done it. We're all more than willing to share our experiences in the federal government. Obviously, we can't help all of commercial industry, but it's going to be huge.
Yep, great. As we wrap up here, I want to tie back and again thank Chad Kirk, DC, for his insightful question around the emergency response. But it clicked for me when you were talking about kind of the issue at Sony, right? Disaster preparedness and response is not just about what happens physically with hurricanes or other kinds of activities, right?
Not.
It's what's your disaster preparedness and response going to be in the event of breaches of your data. And it's no longer a if that's going to happen. It is purely a question of when. When is that significant and malicious intent event going to occur, right? And how are you going to respond to that? Do you guys have plans for that inside your environments today? Maybe a couple minutes?
Of course. But that's not something I really want to talk
Fair
about.
enough, fair enough. Greg, and you guys
Certainly.
obviously
We
as
have
well.
the NKIC, which is, the national level
Mhm.
protection of the cyber environment. So clearly we've got some
Right.
folks focused on that.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Well, I'd also like to say thanks for having us today.
Yes, that
Sure
was
It's
great.
been a lot of fun.
Yeah, I really enjoyed having you guys as well. It's been a
Great.
wonderful conversation. I think as we wrap up here, I want to make sure everybody's aware that the link will be active for another, I believe, 3 months. As you'll have availability of time to continue the conversation that we started here today. Guys, I really do appreciate the time.
Look me up at John Skidlarek.
And there you go. And as you continue this conversation on Twitter, please do use hashtag hybridcloud so that we know you're part of that conversation. We can keep this thing going. Thank you all. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.